Hello and welcome to yet another episode, we'll call it the penultimate episode of 2023. I am Shawn Merwin here with my big thumbs up co-host Teos Avadia. Hey Teos, great to see you yet again.
Fantastic to see you. Cheers to you. Happy Christmas. I have my holiday themed D&D mug that I got. I think it came with paperwork saying that I couldn't say that they had all authorized me or something like that. I don't remember. It was funny.
It says about right. You are only authorized to drink out of this when you roll 10 or higher.
That actually would solve a lot of problems in this world if that's how drinking worked. But look what else.
Exactly.
When I beverage, look how well I beverage.
Oh, that's some good stuff right there. Is it eggnog though?
I mean, there is eggnog.
Okay. Is there a lot of rum in it?
It's eggnog. I mean, eggnog does what eggnog will do. One cannot stop the eggnog. Oh, look at us.
Mm-hmm.
Cup full of cheer on this episode.
We're double fisting it here with different drinks. We are festive.
I even have water.
I mean, our very yeah, you're good. You got one more than I do. I think the various drinks that we're having pretty much sums up a roller coaster 2023. You know, we hit the ground running this year with the OGL crisis, and it's been up and down since. And 2023 is almost over. Maybe next week we'll take a look at the year in review or something. But for now, we should probably get to it. That's why we're paid the big bucks, Teos, to drop knowledge and answer questions. And we're going to get to the question answering part of our segment here with our listener corner. The first message coming in via our Patreon Discord from Honor in the Eye Age, who says, in Mastering Dungeons 168, we've done 168 episodes, Shawn said that resource management adventures should target longer between levels rather than a single 4-hour session. Why so? Is it treating levels themselves as a resource or just to play into a survival exploration feel? For context, I'm currently working on codifying my campaign setting, which is focused on heroic exploration, by which I mean, in this context, exploration that doesn't rely on tracking rations, torches, and arrows, which seems to be a common feature, but instead allowing class resources to fill this resource tracking need. For me, this ties closely to the length of the adventuring day, but not necessarily the number of sessions. Is there an option I'm overlooking here? And when I say resource management, different people can use that word for different things. So when I was talking on that show about resource management, I was talking about the type of adventuring where the character granted resources like hit points, hit dice, spell slots, key points, those sorts of things are constantly being depleted. So there is a race between completing the objective and running out of those resources. And that is what D&D has sort of been over the years, starting with OD&D, original D&D, and going. Rations, water, torches, arrows are a different kind of resource management. And the action economy is yet another sort of resource management. And I'm sure we could think of more if we tried. Yeah. But what I'm talking about is when you ask, we're still not to the center of the dungeon where we need to get, and we're out of hit dice and our cleric is down to cantrips. Do we continue or do we risk a rest? That is my sort of the resource management I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, so I will add that some of my favorite experiences have been around those losses of resources, and it spans various editions, right? So like I can think of when I played OD&D, which was long after OD&D came out, the original box set, I went back and played it, and we had like our pack horses that and I was running the game, but the party would like throw the pack horses at monsters, right? Until there were no more pack horses. And then they just had to deal with the fact that now things were just even worse and even more deadly. And that kind of feel was a big part of what we enjoyed about the experience. There were things we liked and didn't like about it, but that sense of fear was palpable. And in my AD&D games, that sense of fear was also pretty palpable around there is only so much I can take. And rest is not easy. And in fact, like when I think of like Temple of Elemental Evil, and I kept key memories of that, and there are a lot of memorable parts of the adventure, but what I think of most often is situations where we would come so close to death, whether I was playing it or running it. Party's near death, they head back to town, and they might get attacked on the way back by a random encounter, and that could be a TPK, right? And so even that is part of your calculus as a player. And then on the way back, we had a situation when I was running one, and on the way back to the temple, so we're fully rested, we covered what we did in town, we start heading towards the temple, hit a really bad random encounter, and everybody wants to go back to town again. Like it can be that taxing in a system. Right. Third edition, a situation, a battle interactive in an organized play where this, wizard player who was a very clever player, he starts casting scrolls. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm out of spell slots. And it's like, whoa, like you're using those little scraps of power that you have chucked in your backpack ages ago, right? And it was that kind of battle. And those things are really super fun when they come up. I don't want the game to be that way all the time, but I want that possibility to be there.
Right. And in order for that possibility to even take place, you have to have enough encounters and yes, even enough short rests in 5th edition in order to drain hit dice, spells, all those things to get it down to the point where it becomes interesting and dramatic and fun. Because if you just run a 4-hour session, even at low levels, maybe you're getting 4 encounters in.
Yeah.
And does that drain the resources? Probably not. At high levels, when casters have scads and scads of spell slots and many, many, many hit dice, you need several 4-hour sessions worth of play just to start to get people to where their resources are low. And that's why I asked the question on the Eldritch Lorecast about a week ago. Are we ready for an edition of D&D where that resource management component is just gone? Because the game has these sacred cows, right? Spell slots, where that begs for a resource management style game, but the game itself doesn't support a resource management style play.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of there. Now, 4th edition got rid of spell slots. And what happened with 4th edition? It was a wonderful game. It was a great game that old school players did not like because it got rid of those things. So it's this balance of what do you want the game to be, and are you willing to design the game to be that game, with the understanding that you will then alienate a part of your audience who does not appreciate the jettison of those elements that they like in their games.
Yeah. And as this makes you think about the Planescape adventure we're reviewing, because sometimes folks say, well, you can't review an adventure without playing it. And I don't think that's true at all. But there are some things that you don't know, and it's good to put a finger on them. And one of them is, I'm very curious how the lethality and the glitch nature, I won't go into spoilers, but how those play together with the pacing of the adventure, right? So the adventure often has what I think are possibly very deadly situations that you can get out of, but if you don't, you're facing a very deadly thing. One or more characters may die, but the way D&D often works is if a character would truly die, not being down, but die, the party has a big risk of a TPK, right? It's a hot, cold switch. You're either in one zone or you're not. And if characters are truly dying, you're often in a highly dangerous situation. So how does that play as an adventure to maybe have a number of these situations come up? That I only know if I run it, right? Like I really don't know. But I'm very curious as folks really start running through this adventure, what we'll hear about that lethality. Maybe it's not there at all. And so, it's actually the opposite because they're so spread out and paced that if it isn't lethal, then it's probably really easy. And now you gain a level and I wasn't even threatened, and so it could feel really weird if it isn't there. If it's too visible. And then you might feel like, geez, I'm just constantly getting beaten up. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. It's a great question, and one that we will see when the revised fifth edition comes out, if there's any talk, even if it's just in the Dungeon Master's Guide, about that sort of campaign pacing. And we also got something from Nigel Rush via Twitter. Hello, gentlemen. He must not know us too well. The Leroy Jenkins with a flat tire gambit, and we know that that Nigel is from the British Isles because tire is spelled with a Y, which it's so cool. I have a barbarian player in my game that has a problem. He is very much the first out of the taxi and the last to the bar. We all know one. So in other words, he's ready to go, but he doesn't want to pay. He lurks 2 turns away from the melee deliberately, allowing everyone else, including the hapless monster, to take a minimum 2 rounds damage before he so much as graces the fight with his presence, as though it is the most natural way for barbarians to behave. Always screaming "charge" from behind a bush in the middle distance is beyond exasperating, and he has always been like it. Once the fight is over, however, he will be into any chest like Cerberus in a sausage factory before anyone else gets the chance to either draw breath or pop swords back into their scabbards. I've been playing D&D with this chap for nearly 40 years, I know, and I love him to bits, but his barbarian with a risk assessment, I think that maybe risk averseness, is infuriating. Yeah. Are there any clever tactics that a DM and fellow player can use to combat this behavior? Or is it a case of you have been letting him get away with it for 4 decades, you'll just have to suck it up? Love the show. It's essential listening and great company. Nigel from Wales, a Saxon abroad in the true land of dragons. Nigel, man. Love it. Love it. Love it so much. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for listening. All right. So let's dispense with the what's coming first. How did the other players feel? How do you feel? Is it something you can deal with by expressing to the player, you're really making a lot of people angry with this? We'll get that out of the way. Can you lean into it? Can you lean into it and make it a part of the story, a part of the character? Because then you can do some fun things with it, such as there's nothing to say that the threats always have to come from the front, right? If the barbarian is hiding in the bushes, there are such things as magical and dangerous plants in D&D. So set up a situation where you give the barbarian a perfect place to hide. The threat looks like it's out in front. Everyone goes forward. The real threat is the bushes, which are then having 2 rounds to snack on the barbarian. Does the barbarian worship a deity of any kind? Because if so, what does the deity think of this? Right? Cord, I think, was the Greyhawk. Was it the Greyhawk?
Yeah.
Right. The strength god. Yep. Cord may look at this chap and say, you know what? I've had enough of this. This is bristling my godly neck hair, and I am going to come down and have a little chat with this barbarian. And you could turn it into a role-playing situation where Cord decides to test this barbarian to see if this barbarian really has what it takes. Teos, any thoughts?
I mean, it reminds me of a player that I used to play with. His character name was Ansiv, backwards for Vecna. And Ansiv would declare at the beginning of play, I am 60 feet behind the rest of the party. And he did this because he had decided not to, as all other 3rd edition wizards, take the Toad familiar. And he had still decided to drop his constitution down to meaningless levels so that he could boost everything else. So he was very, very vulnerable. Total glass cannon wizard. So what he would do is stay so far back. And what he'd say to the DM is, what Ansiv thinks is, I am so far back that nothing will attack me. If something, for some reason, really, truly would wait that long to attack me, well, then I guess they're going to murder me. But that's my plan. And the DM would usually think about it and kind of go like, yeah, okay. And they'd usually not like just force it, which is what he was trying to do through explaining it, right? They would,
right.
But it meant the first round, he was often catching up to everybody else. But he was hilarious about it. It was not
Right.
destructive to the play experience. It was part of the hilarity of it. And there were all kinds of things like where he couldn't get inside the room, so he lobs a fireball through the window, and he asks the half orc where to place the fireball because he can't see inside. The half orc tells him the wrong direction. All of this in character. So he puts it where the half orc doesn't say to put it, because we're that fun a group, right? That we understand each other. So he literally doesn't, he does the opposite of what the character told him because he knew that the character would get it wrong. And, you know, like that kind of fun, then it's okay. We all enjoyed it. Now, I will say, sometimes I wanted to have this game and then go play in a different game for a bit and then come back to this game. So that's one way you can deal with it. Have another group that lets you get to those other types of play you want, right? Like, and that's true of everything. Like, if these are all like, you might really enjoy bashing things to death, but then you need a more cerebral group that, you know, it's not that the kids aren't smart or whatever, but you go with the group that, you know, wants to role play and whatever, and you play those kinds of games. And so that's one option, is to mix it up. But I like your advice. You have to think about how destructive or how fun it is, and therefore what kind of course corrections to apply. But if you are, I mean, you use the word frustrated, right? And so when our listener says frustrated, I think then you do need to at some point get to where you probably have a talk, and you can do minor things to kind of see if you can get some course correction, apply some pressure, right? That encourages a little bit of behavior. But you may have to just sit down and say, hey, my friend, I enjoyed this for a while. It's getting a little frustrating, the character concept, and I get it, and you're being true to your character, but for the good of play, can we make some adjustments, right? To just improve it and make it a little more fun.
Yeah.
Because it's part of being honest, right? Your friends, be honest.
Yeah. A curse that if you are not the first person to strike the enemy in every battle for the next 3 battles, you lose a point of strength each time. That will course correct in game. Now that may cause hard feelings the other way, but you know, as Teos said, if you can turn it into a story, assuming that the players like the story, if the player is just doing this because they fear that their character is going to die, then that's time to step out and say, listen, you know, let's have a talk about what we want out of our games, et cetera, et cetera. But thank you for the Cerberus and a Sausage Factory line. That is, love it. Now let's get into our news and commentary section, starting with some pretty sad news, with Hasbro laying off many, many people, including deep cuts to the D&D team and other folks at Wizards of the Coast. So if you think back a few episodes, we discussed that Hasbro's third quarter earnings were pretty dismal. And that follows, you know, other bad news for their toy business, causing net revenue to drop 10% in quarter 3 alone, a loss of $428 million between January and the end of September. So what did we say at the time, Teos?
Hasbro needs answers.
And what were those answers, Teos?
Sadly, so far, it's layoffs. They did one set of 800 earlier this year, and now they announced, and we've begun to see, the layoff of 1,100 people this year. And that is about 20% of the Hasbro workforce, just under that.
So it looks like the last time during those 800 person layoffs, WotC was spared for the most part. But this time the layoffs were so great that it even affected Wizards. And it's not unusual to see these broad cuts, you know, even across departments or parts of the company that were doing well. So this impacted Magic the Gathering, the D&D teams, including people who we know personally, who we think are great. And we were very, very surprised to see. Who was laid off? Well, Dan Dillon was the first to speak out publicly, saying that he had been let go. He's been there 5 years, awesome game designer, awesome person. The first surprise was Mike Merles, who was a Magic the Gathering director. He ushered 5th edition into being and was one of the major forces at Wizards behind the Baldur's Gate 3 licensing. He's flew to Europe several times to coordinate the license of that game with Larian. Chris Lindsay, who helped architect the DM's Guild of all things, which had to be a great revenue earner for Wizards. And at one point, he led all of organized play, the Guild Adepts program, and also, worked with several other third parties on licensing and coordination. Liz Shu, who's been the head of licensing and publishing for D&D for years, who took an early retirement.
And Liz, Liz
Yeah.
is a person who doesn't often get to the level where fans hear about her, but Liz has
Yeah.
been, she basically was the lead person from the sort of D&D upper kind of management
Mhm.
side that spearheaded 5e.
Yeah.
I think of Liz Shu sort of as a Kathleen Kennedy type, right? That,
Mhm.
but just not notorious, right? Just in the background, trying to get all the pieces to align and move forward. And so significant person to then decide, well, I'll take this early retirement package, right?
Yeah. When I was interacting with Wizards folks on projects and they were talking about like the people who they were answering to,
Mm-hmm.
Liz's name came up
All
constantly.
the time. Yeah.
Um, Bree Heiss, the art director for D&D, Natalie Egan, a product manager, Amy Dallin, D&D Beyond producer and host, David Hartless, D&D Beyond director. All of these folks have said in one way or another that they are no longer with Wizards of the Coast. And immediately we saw a response. Teos, you want to take over some of these questions and the answers to these questions?
Yeah, and I mean, to me, it's really striking how different the reactions are from where they were 10 years ago when this was fairly commonplace, right? And I
Mhm.
think there are a lot of folks that are new that maybe don't understand the historical context that think of it first and foremost as a fan, which is very understandable, rather than understanding the business world. Um, so, is this related to the OGL? Not at all. And I see nothing at all and hear nothing at all of anything indicative of like a backlash against folks who were involved in the OGL or anything like that. It has absolutely nothing to do with the OGL. It's very sad that 2023 is marked by the OGL at the beginning and these layoffs at the end. It has certainly tainted what 2023 could have been for D&D and for Wizards and for Hasbro. But it's not related. Um, is Hasbro unaware of how well D&D has done? Not at all. We've been covering each of the quarters. It used to be that Hasbro would never ever talk about D&D. That era ended more than 5 years ago, more than 10 years ago. And it has been significant how often Hasbro thinks about D&D and how much it has even had to deal with the investors, the owners of its stock, talking about the importance of Wizards of the Coast, Magic the Gathering, and D&D. So, how does all of this happen? Which I think is what everybody is ultimately trying to wonder. And what's the appropriate reaction, right? Is the appropriate reaction to say, I hate Wizards. I will never purchase anything from them. How could they do this to people in December? Do they not have hearts and souls? So this happens because we live in a world where companies are not allowed to have several bad years. They are expected to pursue growth relentlessly. So when that growth does not happen, companies must do something, even if nothing has actually gone wrong, or even if the thing that may have gone wrong can't be found or pinpointed, right? So in the toy industry, there is no super clarity as to what is going on. Maybe people just aren't playing with toys, or maybe they will next year. It's just not clear, right? Mattel's having a great year, probably because of Barbie. But that level of intelligence just doesn't exist. And the expectation, nonetheless, from investors, from capitalism as a system, is that you will do something wrong, something about it. But only certain moves are rewarded by all of your investors. And something that investors strangely love rewarding is layoffs. Wall Street loves to recognize a layoff and buy more of your stock, despite the fact that layoff math doesn't prove itself over time. There isn't good studies don't back up that a layoff means a company will become successful. But nonetheless, that's how investors act.
Mhm.
Are December layoffs cruel and unusual? Yeah, they're totally cruel, but a layoff at any time is cruel. And it's not unusual at all. It really has to do with your yearly revenue, the yearly reporting. Most companies will report on a 4-quarter basis that starts in January and ends at the end of the year. And so you are going to measure your year by the end of that quarter. So that's when you're really facing the math. And in theory, what you've been doing all of those quarters is avoiding larger layoffs. But come that end of the year, now you got to pay the piper. You've got to look at the books and you've got to make the decision of what to do. Why are you doing it? Because if you didn't, in theory, your company would face even worse situation the following year, right? Not just from stock, but from all of the situation that you're facing, right? If toys really aren't selling, then you can't have that many people make them and make that many and so on. And we see this across all kinds of industries, right? Shawn, anything you want to add here?
No, I was sort of surprised with how vehement the reaction was, and then I realized that Wizards hasn't done this sort of layoff in over 10 years.
Yeah.
Or if they haven't been as public. And this used to be an annual thing. It would be, oh, it's 2 weeks before Christmas. Let's go to EN World and see who's been laid off.
Yeah.
And so I realized, oh, people who were 8, 10, 12, 15, 18 at the time of those layoffs are now 28. And they just maybe haven't lived in a world, maybe they're not like from a working class environment where these things are annual. I can't count the number of times my family, who are, mainly our factory workers, have been laid off. I can't count the number of times I've been laid off. and it just it's a thing that happens. And is it fun? No. Is it good? No. Is it because of a system that's fundamentally broken? Yes. But go to the Fortune 500, which Hasbro is no longer a member of because their revenue has fallen them out of that Fortune 500 ranking, and see how many layoffs those companies have.
Yeah.
Now you're talking the hundreds of thousands, and it's just the way that capitalism works. And unfortunately, it's such a machine that it protects itself from any sort of repercussions.
Yeah, or
as people have said, or exactly as people have said, the people, if you boycott or if you yell about this, the people that are causing this will never hear you. They don't know you exist. They don't know I exist. They will never read your tweets. They will never read your Facebook posts. And it will just continue. And trying to get revenge on them is impossible. The people that you're getting revenge on are the people who are going to lose their jobs next year. So it's an impossible situation to be in and to try to rectify.
And a question I hear often is, is D&D beholden to Hasbro? Has D&D become Hasbro? Has it lost its presence? Is there no more Wizards? Is there no more D&D? And yes and no, right? There are benefits and detriments to being part of a larger company. Hasbro is how you're able to purchase D&D Beyond, right? Which is widely revered as a smart move. Hasbro is what allows you to launch a movie and a TV show. It's what allows to have talks with Netflix, as we'll talk about later. It can connect D&D teams to the writers of Stranger Things. It can do all of this, right? And D&D has said throughout the process that they still have a large measure of autonomy. They are still a D&D, but it's also part of this large corporation. And when bad times hit, it's affected. And there is going to be a time when strategies are set out and you may or may not agree with those strategies. That is part of it. But, are layoffs unprecedented? You talked about how they've happened in D&D's past, but also across the history of TRTG space, we've seen this. The thing is that often most RPG companies never reach a size where this is even talked about because they just let like one person go, because that's the level of adjustment, unfortunately, that they're doing to their budget, right? Probably the example I can really think of is Evil Hat. they really invested in, let's hire an art person, let's hire an editor. They did a bunch of these things. And then they had to lay them all off one time near the end of the year, I believe, because the finances had turned and they have not gone back and hired those folks, right? It just happened. So it'll happen to a company of any size, or it can happen to a company of any size. It doesn't inherently make them evil. And I think along these lines, yesterday there was the Banff podcast invited on Dan Dillon and Aiton Bernstein, who's a senior developmental editor who was also laid off. Invited both of these folks just laid off to come on the podcast and discuss the layoffs. And I bet a lot of people showed up expecting this to be we hate wizards, here's the injustice that happened to us. And they didn't do that, right? It was the opposite of that.
Yeah. They got a layoff package. They can't discuss it. They both said nothing was cruel or unusual about the layoff, and Wizards has been helpful, offering them as much as they could offer them to be there or to do well going forward. They said, please do not boycott Wizards or Hasbro on their behalf. Do you want to do the thing? Do your thing. Right. We're not going to tell you not to, but please don't say that you're doing it for the people that were laid off, because at least in 2 cases, they don't want you to do that. Yeah. They are still big D&D fans. They're still going to be buying D&D. They're going to raise their kids playing D&D. What else did they talk about, Teos?
Aiton really gave glowing kudos to Jeremy Crawford. He emphasized both of them emphasized how awesome all of their colleagues are. Both said they would work there again, right? Dan says it's the dream job he didn't know existed for most of his life. He said he was absolutely happy with his job, thrilled to work there. Quote, I would do it again. I don't regret it, not for a second. And he said he couldn't say anything bad about that experience, right? And that's probably not what a lot of folks expect, but that's just the unfortunate reality that is against what we want as fans, where we want to do something. We want to rage, and because it is wrong and it is terrible, but maybe not for the reasons we think, and it's far more complicated than we might initially think. They both also said that they're super positive about the coming 2024 rules updates. I think some folks were asking questions expecting this to be I don't know what the company's doing. What are they thinking? No, they said, we are so excited for the 2024 updates. We really think people are going to love them. We can't wait to get them. We'll be buying them. So the link to that video is in our show notes, or look for the Banff podcast. You can find it on YouTube as well, because I think it was a live YouTube video, so it's in the live section. We have also a list in our show notes, Shawn, of all the other folks that were laid off, including across software areas, communications, program managers, Magic the Gathering areas, and a lot of folks who are very highly regarded who were let off. And it's worth saying that what often happens in these situations, because one of the things that I think I've seen over and over again is, why are they killing off the golden goose, right? Wizards has done so well, Magic, D&D, this is what's doing well. The reality is they have been as insulated as possible, but when you're cutting this many jobs, you can't just spare entire groups, and in fact is not rewarded to do so. So you must apply some budget to each of your departments and areas. And so they likely assigned a dollar figure to folks like Kyle Brink or to Dan, the vice president above him. And probably they had to sit down and look at everybody and go, well, what can we do? And it's a horrible calculus where you have to think, do I take this one really amazing person who has a really high salary? Or do I take these 2 other people, or 4 people that are new but do so much of the work, right? And there is no proper answer to that. And so that's how you end up with someone as good as Dan being laid off, or as good as Mike Merle's being laid off. Like, it's attempt to make this math work, rather than, and it is not indicative of some lack of understanding of what makes Wizards good, right?
Yeah, and it's not because they spoke out about the OGL crisis. So it's not because of this other or that other conspiracy theory that you may be sitting on. Yeah. It is, as Teos says, it's the math of it and the staffing can we find someone else to pick up these people's tasks uh, if we let them go?
Yeah. The last
Anything else on this that
Yeah. Yeah. So the last thing is just Penny Arcade has had a couple of comics, as you'd expect, pointing fun at this situation, trying to offer their commentary, and both of their recent comics have had some really poignant pieces about them because each comic comes with a blog about it. And Jerry Holkins has such a great way of talking about these things, and it's not the only view, but it's a really good view. And he in his awesome voice, the full quote is in our show notes, or you can find it on penny-arcade.com. But I love this part where he says, "But like the OGL modifications, I suspect this tumult presages a more digital future for the product. I don't see how it couldn't. Magic makes money hand over fist, but Dungeons and Dragons has always been a sticky wicket outside of pure licensing. Imagine if you could buy one hamburger and then you and your friends could eat that hamburger for 30 years. D&D is, for lack of a better term than I've used previously, a culture. Serving that culture is such an honor. Does such a culture survive, truly survive, lodged within a pair of digitally aggressively monetized parentheses?"
Yeah, it's very right straight to the point.
Mhm.
Um, as Jerry, well, he's not right straight to the point, but he gets to the point after using many, many large words that
Beautiful
are
words, yeah.
generally funny and quite astute. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of that's there in the show notes. And again, our condolences to everybody who lost their jobs, not just at Wizards of the Coast, and not just at Hasbro, but for whatever corporation, whatever business you're working for. If you were let go, at
Yeah.
the start of this winter, we're so sorry, and we hope you quickly find your feet again.
Yeah.
So, from the bad news to the really news, Netflix may be creating a Baldur's Gate 3 spin-off series or movie. Uh, Giant Freaking Robot, a digital news site, says that Netflix is in talks to the rights of a live action adaptation of the Baldur's Gate 3 video game. Baldur's Gate 3, of course, just won big time at the Game Awards. Game of the Year, Player's Voice, Best Performance, Community Support, a role playing game, multiplayer game. It's unclear whether these talks are focused on a series, a movie, neither, both, how close to final negotiations are. But it's not a shock to see news, at least the rumors of news
Mhm.
like this, when a video game now makes as big a splash as Baldur's Gate 3 did.
Yeah, and we've seen a couple of examples of video games becoming a show of some kind, whether animated or otherwise, on Netflix. So yeah, I could see that. I think a lot of people would welcome it. So we'll see. That could be a big feather in everyone's cap. So we'll hope for that.
Mhm. Tell me about Spelljammer Academy, the Vecna Dossier, and the D&D Beyond Advent Calendar, Teos.
The D&D Advent Calendar at times would have sort of fun things you could download in past years, coloring pages, stuff like that. This year it's been all coupons until we got
Mm.
yesterday, I believe it was the 17th. On the 17th, they had the thing of the day. If you click on the little digital door, is that you can download previously free, otherwise no longer available, Spelljammer Academy, which is a set of 4, I think, adventures. Really good, that introduces the Spelljammer system and in fact can take you to the start of the adventure. So it can even be a nice, extension of it. That had been free and then was no longer available, so you can get it again now through the end of the year. Same with the Vecna Dossier, which is a high-level adventure where you go off against Vecna. It's a very small piece and it has information on Vecna, but it's a fun download. And given that there will be a Vecna adventure coming next year, then this can be a fun thing to get. So if you'd missed on those, act now. By the end of the year, follow those links and download it. You can either find the Advent Calendar on D&D Beyond or click the link in our show notes. And gee, may I say again, I want PDFs. I want these things to always be up. I don't know why they go away to begin with, but at least they're back for now.
Duly noted. So, what's the greatest RPG adventure of all time? That question was answered by a lot of folks on the blog Scroll for Initiative, as the host asked designers to weigh in on their choice of the best adventure. And Teos and I were very happy to give our choices. What did you choose, Teos?
Well, I was my typical person. I couldn't make up my mind. I even named something you wrote,
Keep
Defiance
going.
and Flan, because I think that that has been one of the
Mm,
toughest jobs anybody has ever gotten in organized playwriting. And you nailed it so well that they basically had to do it for the longest time to kind of keep bringing that magic. So I write about that. I agree with Scott Fitzgerald Gray that Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh is there. I, of course, have to talk about Pharaoh, which we
mhm,
covered on our show. But the where I go a little
mhm,
interesting maybe is to bring some non D&D attention to things, and it's talking about the Eclipse Phase science fiction adventures and how they do truly mind blowing experiences. Things like where, and I've talked about on the show before, but you are all playing the exact same character. You just woke up from being backed up. You all have our bodies with the same personality downloaded in, and you see on the news that presumably the real you has just committed a murder and the DM says to you, "What do you do?" Right? And just that kind of just
mhm.
sci-fi that's out of the best books, out of the best novels, the best TV shows, and really put there where I see a lot of companies that do sci-fi fail at that. They just it's the same old D&D adventure. Go investigate this dungeon. It's a sci-fi dungeon. Go escort
Yep.
this caravan.
Mhm.
It's a sci-fi caravan, right? These, Eclipse Phase to me. What'd you pick?
Well, I read the question wrong. I didn't read what's the best adventure of all time. I thought it was what was the adventure that impacted you the most.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose an adventure for the top secret game called Operation Spreckelhaltespell.
Sure.
And that this impacted me because it was the first taste of a non D&D game that I ever got. Someone had it and they weren't going to use it, so they gave it to me, which is how I got almost all of my D&D books before the age of 18. So I read this and I was like, this isn't D&D. This is a different game and it does different things and it tells different cool stories. And so it sort of taught me that you can do lots of different things with this hobby, and it doesn't have to be sword and sorcery, high fantasy, gritty fantasy, whatever. It can do super spies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I chose that. But there were lots of folks, Mike Shea and Monty Cook, and
Robin
you
Laws.
name, luminary industry, Robin Laws. They were giving their opinions. So it's a really, it's a good list. It's got a lot of what you would expect, right? Some of the classics of D&D. Some people chose things outside of D&D
Yeah,
as
James
great adventures,
Introcaso names the Dracula
but
dossier, which you worked on.
it doesn't.
Night's Black Agents, fantastic.
Yep,
And
yep. That. It's a really great adventure too. Uh, and so it's hard to say the best adventure because best is totally
sure.
subjective and depending on what you want and who you are, uh, it's going to be different. But it's a great list if you want to go check it out. And if you have a good reason to choose something other than what's on that list, you can let us know.
Yeah.
You know where to find us out there. You know where to find us. Uh, Speaking of finding us, you will be finding us talking about the last part of the Planescape adventure in this episode. But there is an article out there, 13 tips for running Planescape. What's in this blog post, Teos?
Yeah, so posted on the blog United Federation of Charles, there are a bunch of ideas, 13 of them, for how to run Planescape. And some of them are really quite good and worth reviewing and talking about and thinking through. Sigil is a character. They don't fully flesh out this concept, but it's a neat way, a clever way to think of the city as a living, breathing sort of entity with a specific feel to it,
Mhm.
and how it reacts in reliable ways to what happens in it, and thinking through that city's character and how this is totally different than any other city, right? That is, I think, a valuable way, a lens through which to look at a game that you run. Giving your players a stake in Sigil, and later they have a tip: keep a home base. And this made me think about the Adventure Fortune's Wheel. It has some of this, but it doesn't super reinforce ties to factions or other city elements, except in very brief experiences in Chapter 2. You do get a sort of home, but it doesn't do much to reinforce that. So I thought that was really interesting. Harmonium as antagonist, and it says, this is a punk noir setting where the lawmakers and enforcers are constant obstacles, and just that kind of punk versus law aspect of it, I thought was really good. Don't trust alignment, so looking past good and evil and law and chaos, because the organizations reflect how the city itself is really a neutral place. The city is neutrality, so they're all occupying. They are colored by that aspect. Embrace the weird, right? This is a place where anything can happen, so you want to make that true for the players. And the factions are a never-ending source of drama. Traditional nobility doesn't exist. It's the factions that are vying for power, holding grudges, and making mistakes. And that kind of plays out in big, tangible ways that the players experience. I thought that was really useful.
Yeah, reading this, I didn't read the whole blog, but I read the highlights, and it helped me go back and reassess the look at this adventure that we had, both in terms of things that it could have done, as well as things that it's trying to do that we may be overlooking. And we'll get into that when we talk about this adventure again in a couple minutes. Last but not least for this news, the final days of the Seeker's Guide to Enchanting Emporiums Kickstarter are upon us. You have until Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern time to back this. So if you are into magic items, if your players love magic items, if you love magic items, if you want new ways to introduce magic shops with adventures and interesting NPCs surrounding them, you can check out this Kickstarter until Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. What do you have, Teos?
Just a last minute recommendation that came from our Discord. The Journals of Kaz the Minotaur, the Lost Colony, is out on the DMs Guild. $15 to buy the Dragonlance Nexus project. And it's neat. This project has in the past, sort of existed independently, but now it's trying to sort of shape things and produce products that kind of really help expand its view of how Dragonlance can be this amazing setting. So worth checking out if you're a Dragonlance fan. I have not looked at this myself, but the folks on our Discord were very excited about it, so we wanted to share it.